For those who don't know, Harry Anslinger essentially launched the war on drugs in the early 20th century, and one of his prime targets and then victims was, in fact, Billie Holiday, who was arrested several times for possession of heroin, and did time in jail for this. And much of this led to her death at the age of 44. And, you know, we've all known about Billie Holiday's sad life, right? She sang about it constantly, and we've all known that. But you're right, describing the precise mechanisms by which she died, you know, and all the things that were deployed against her. I think that was largely unknown until your book came out.
What also is really important, right? Billie Holiday was not killed by her demons. Billie Holiday was
Mm,
killed by our demons,
mm,
right? You know, I remember Annie Ross, who was a great jazz singer herself, who was a friend of Billie's, when I interviewed her, said, you know, we've been told this story, oh, poor, weak Billie Holiday consumed by, you know, heroin. It's fucking bullshit. Billie
mm,
Holiday was an unbelievably brave person, right? She is the, you know, one person described Strange Fruit, her song against lynching, as the musical starting gun for the civil rights movement.
right.
And no matter how much the state tries to repress her and threaten her and intimidate her, her attitude was, fuck you, I will act as if I am free, right?
Hmm.
And you cannot stop me.
Mm-hmm.
And this, you know, her own dad had been killed by racism. His name was Clarence Holiday. He was a musician. He was traveling in the South, and he got ill with, I think it was septicemia, but something that's relatively easily treated. And no hospital would take him because he was black, and he just died. Right, he was in his
Mm-hmm.
30s.
Mm-hmm.
She knew, not in some, you know, woke hysteria, but in a very real sense, what racism did to people. And her attitude was, fuck you, you have no right to do this, and I will not let you. And you know, it sounds, I don't know, again, I'm conscious this sounds a bit pretentious, but now when I think about Billie Holiday and I was thinking about historical analogies for her, um, the person she reminds me of is Tank Man, the man who stood in front of the tank in Tiananmen Square, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you think about that man, if people look at pictures of him, we still don't know his name
Right.
because the communist tyranny that governs China has successfully removed even his name,
Mm.
right? But what do we know about Tank Man? We know from the photographs that he is carrying shopping bags, and it appears that he was a man who was just going about his daily life. He went shopping, he's
Hmm.
walking through Tiananmen Square, which people did. It's obviously Central Square, it's like Times Square, and he saw a tank and he knew it wasn't right, right? He sees a tank, he says, this tank has no right to be here. And he stands in front of the tank and he shouts at the tank, right? And the tank famously kills him, and his identity is eradicated. I feel like that is who Billie Holiday was, right? Billie Holiday was a person who was trying to fucking live her life, right?
Mm-hmm.
She was trying to survive, having been, you know, horribly abused as a child. That's why she had a heroin addiction. But she was one of the great artistic geniuses of the 20th century. She invents a different way of singing, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, singing, so human beings have been doing for quite a long time, right? She managed to invent a new way of doing that, singing behind the beat. Frank Sinatra famously said his form of singing came directly from Billie Holiday.
Mm-hmm.
She transforms American music. She's a genius in the way that someone like Picasso was a genius, right? She sees something people have not seen before. She's trying to go about her life being her genius self. And she sees a tank, right? In her
Mm-hmm.
case, the tank was the insanity of the war on drugs, which she was extraordinarily prescient about right from the beginning, as many people in the United States were when the war on drugs begins. You
Mm-hmm.
know, Harry Anslinger is the first person to ever use the phrase war on drugs, right? And she says no. She sees a tank, she says no, and the tank runs her over. But we know Tank Man had the courage to do what was right. And Billie Holiday had the courage to do what was right. And the reason I'm feeling that kind of satisfied glow at the moment, although it's still a absolutely monstrous injustice. Billie Holiday should have lived to be an old woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
And instead she dies, as you said, at the age of 44, while there are people protesting. You know, Anslinger's men arrest her in the hospital where she is dying. They handcuff her to the hospital bed. And I interviewed the last surviving person who was in that room, a man named the Reverend Eugene Callender, fucking amazing man, who then led protests outside the hospital with signs saying, let Lady Day live, because they knew these people were effectively killing her. I mean, when she was buried in Harlem, they had riot police at the church because
Mm-hmm.
people knew she'd been killed, and they were worried, the police were worried that they were going to burn the place down, right? Um, And the reason I feel that glow is that I feel, at least now, very large numbers of people will know, not just that Billie Holiday was a musical genius, they would always have known that, but that Billie Holiday was an extraordinary hero in all sorts of ways. And and it helped me as well. The reason I came into this story myself is because we had a lot of addiction in my family, and I wrote Chasing the Scream partly because I was just trying to figure out what I could do, how I could understand what was going on. And like a lot of people in that position, in addition to being very compassionate to the people that I loved who had addiction problems, I was also very angry with them. We all have a kind of Harry Anslinger in our head, hopefully not the
Right.
extreme racism that he had, but when it comes to addiction, a lot of us are angry. And one of the things I'm really proud about this story is, in our culture, we tell one heroic story about people with addiction problems, which is that sometimes they recover from their addiction.
Right.
And that is indeed an absolutely heroic story. And everyone listening who's in that position should be really proud of themselves. But that is not the only heroic story here, right? Billie Holiday never recovered from her addiction. She dies with a heroin addiction. She was still a fucking hero, right? No matter what these people did to her, she sang Strange Fruit. She continued fighting. She told the truth. She stood in front of the tank and defied it, right? And